Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in TradFi, digital assets, technology, and financial planning. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site is Dana Simberkoff, Chief Risk, Privacy, and Security Officer of AvePoint, Joe Wykes, Head of U.S. Operations at Vention, Mitch, Avnet, Founder and Managing Partner of Compliance Risk Concepts, and Jeff Schwartz, Vice President of Engineering at Checkpoint Software. They join me to discuss best practices for integrating AI and the future of AI regulation and compliance. It is great to have everyone with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. Welcome to Market Site. And Dana, we'll start with you. Let's go around the horn here. Give us a brief introduction in terms of where AvePoint sits within the AI ecosystem.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us here today. AvePoint is a technology company that provides solutions to our clients around the world that help manage, migrate, and protect data, particularly data in the cloud. And so AI for us is really important part of the evolution of the digital marketplace. It becomes incredibly important to have well-curated information to make sure that data that's being fed into AI models is accurate and available to people who should have it, protected from people who should not.
Right. And Joe, tell us about Vention.
Yeah, so we're bringing industrial automation solutions to small and medium manufacturers. That makes up about 98% of manufacturing companies here in the United States. Specifically, we offer a cloud robotics platform that allows manufacturers to design and program machines, think robots, and then operate them, and to do so quickly and easily.
All right. And Compliance Risk Concepts.
Thanks so much for having us here. Compliance Risk Concepts is a professional services regulatory compliance consultancy. We work primarily with broker-dealers, asset managers, financial institutions, on a host of regulatory compliance issues. Front and center these days is really how to implement the use of AI within traditional financial services organizations.
Mm-hmm. And Jeff, Checkpoint?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. At Checkpoint, we deliver a best-in-class security platform that's AI-powered and cloud-delivered. We use this platform to help our customers achieve better security outcomes.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, I mean, even just sitting around the table here, we can see that there's 4 separate use cases for implementing AI technology. So it doesn't seem like it's something that's going to be, down the road, Joe. You have to be thinking about this now and implementing it now.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think that for the large majority of manufacturing here in the United States, the promise of AI is exciting, there's no doubt. But actually, when you think about robot penetration into the small and medium segment, it's less than 5%. And so there is a series of building blocks that need to be put in place first to make sure that they can take advantage of that technology. And that's what we're very focused on, is how do we start with some simple AI use cases. One might be design, and we can talk about more of that in a moment. But that's really the challenge is how do we put the building blocks in place so they can start to build a reliable foundation and take advantage of this technology as it matures.
Mm-hmm. And Mitch, you're cautiously optimistic about it in use cases?
Absolutely. I think we have to be, as an industry, careful, thoughtful, and pragmatic about how it's used, and we just can't turn over the keys, right? And so I think it's something like any other sort of new, innovative sort of approach. We have to be close followers and really figure out how we want to regulate it and implement it into the frameworks that our clients operate in.
Mm-hmm. And to your point earlier, Dana, I mean, you're working with so much personal and workplace data, and you've got to keep that safe, and of course security is a concern with AI.
It is, security and privacy, and I think all of us understand that privacy is personal. We want to make sure that our data is protected, and AvePoint recently did a survey with some of our industry partners and found that while 71% or so of companies felt that they were ready to deploy AI, when they actually went to do that in their organizations, over or close to 50% of them actually had a problem with inappropriate exposure of data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So.
and especially, Jeff, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's being, the good actors and the bad actors are leveraging the technology.
Yeah, for sure. AI is, it's not a short-term trend. This is effectively a climate change that will impact every industry. It will impact it in 4 discrete ways. One, the attackers will be able to weaponize tools that are vastly more sophisticated and vastly lower cost than they were traditionally. On the defensive side, vendors such as ourselves are going to be able to leverage these tools to be able to provide better security outcomes. And then on the usage side, every organization is going to figure out how to tool AI into their operational model to be able to leverage it. And then finally, there's a privacy element that is going to impact and create data silos around how third parties are leveraging your proprietary information in the implementation of AI and usage of AI.
Right. Well, let's talk about AI washing and over-reliance. I mean, we were talking about this earlier off camera. Everybody has AI within their story at some point. So when, how do you determine if it's, Dana, a real story and AI is being leveraged and there's, proven revenue stream, or there's actual problems that are being solved?
Well, I think one really important thing to remember is that AI doesn't necessarily create a new problem. It amplifies and accelerates one that's existed for some time. Mm-hmm. And it's really important to not overly rely on it, but to treat it really like an intern. So you want to think about what you're assigning to AI, what you're trusting it for, and how you're using it inside of the organization. And I think good basic data governance principles help to make that decision a little bit more solid.
Yeah, I mean, I think in manufacturing, there's a lot of interest and a lot of excitement about, for example, humanoid robots. But actually, as a form factor, it doesn't really work for many, many use cases in the manufacturing plants here in this country. But it's bringing attention to it. So there's a lot of excitement, but the real practical applications are far more simple. How do I have a robot do task A to task B easily and effectively and precisely? And so it comes back to these ideas of how can we get back to reality of what's going to be practically useful for me today in my factory, in my plant right now, somewhere in America.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're looking to fill jobs where there's just not enough people. For example, like on auto manufacturer is an example. If you need more workers and there's just enough people to fill those jobs, then you can start to, leverage the robotic technology to make up for the lack of workforce.
It's a very, very real concern. The workforce is aging out in manufacturing. It's not necessarily that appealing to young people to go in, but if you put a robot in there, if you put a platform that allows you to take advantage of that, suddenly it becomes a different kind of skill set, and you can upskill those workers, you can attract more workers, you can drive efficiency, and obviously you can remove risk.
I think in financial services, one of the things, and we've seen in recent enforcement actions, is it's really hip to say AI is part of your model, and in a lot of these instances, organizations are putting that front and center, even though that may or may not be as true as they want to believe it is. And so you really have to think about that in your marketing and advertising and your disclosures, because you do not want to profess to be relying on something and then have it not be the case ultimately, where there's really a lot of manual processes that are still being relied upon, whether it's in portfolio construction or even the creation of equity research. There needs to be a balanced approach to how you disclose the use, and it has to be forthright. And I see that being front and center of where the regulators are going.
We've seen this as well, that it's very easy for vendors and providers to say that they are AI enabled or using AI in their tool set. But sometimes it's very difficult to prove, and two, it requires vigilance on the end user community to be able to discern what are the differentiated outcomes that are uniquely achievable with this AI tool set, and how can I improve my operations? And when it comes, in the case of manufacturing as an example, that how can I automate in such a fashion that my employees can now provide more advanced critical thinking and innovation to the business, as opposed to more tedious or specific tasks, task-driven functions.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's replacing humans, right? It's more of making, if you don't have to write a 2-3 hour job description, right, you can move on and do things that are, more conducive of driving revenue for the business or whatever your function is. But I think one of the challenges that companies are grappling with, Jeff, you have this rush to go to market and have this product available, but there are concerns where you need back testing, you need to work with your CISOs and your risk management teams and so forth, because the risk to that is if there is a failure, to your point earlier, you can't just shut down certain verticals of the company because, oops, we didn't think about all these other factors that go into it. I mean, you just don't want to invest money in AI because you have a budget.
There's huge concerns around that space. One, what is your data loss prevention policy? How are you controlling privacy and proprietary information? How is the AI engine that you're inputting this information into leveraging or cascading that information and perhaps copying it to other models? There's concerns around prompt or intent concerns that if the engine is actually providing the information that it should be, or if information is being injected that will poison that AI learning model. So re-educating or rerunning that learning model becomes a very, very expensive, very difficult task that you can't just pull that bad data element out, that you have to rerun the entire engine.
Right, especially financial services. It's one of the most heavily regulated verticals.
It is, and I've heard everything from, well, this could replace our entire compliance department. And you know, listen, having been a 30-year, let's call it, compliance veteran, you know, compliance historically is known as the business prevention unit, but that's not the case anymore, and it only further legitimizes the need for good compliance resources, because at the end of the day, anytime you're relying on technology to satisfy a regulatory requirement, you can outsource the function, but you can't outsource the risk, and you can't. So there's always going to have to be that oversight, and I think again it creates different sorts of opportunities for compliance officers. It doesn't eliminate the need.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, and I agree with you there. Compliance isn't, you know, a cost center. I mean, you know, technically it is, but without functioning compliance and keeping the firm safe, there is no business. Right.
Well, absolutely, and like, you know, just to go back to my example of equity research, you can use an AI-driven model to come up with a business case to buy any security, right? And it's going to pull what it's going to pull, but contextually and factually, is it accurate? And so that's where the danger is, because to a layperson or a novice, this sounds correct, I'm going to rely on it, but is it? And so that's where I think a lot of the risk lies.
Yeah.
And I would just add that I think that rather than thinking about compliance as that sort of business stopper, when we think about AI and its deployment, we can also think about the security and privacy controls that we put in place as enablers, right? So in the same way that brakes allow you to drive really fast, you know, these kind of controls that are put in place through data governance, through good security and privacy practices, and through compliance allow you to really realize the benefit and the potential of AI.
Oh, and they become really part and parcel of your value prop commercially. And because anyone doing business with you, they're going to want to know that you have these controls in place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost it's like counterparty risk at the end of the day. If you think about it from a financial services perspective. I want to talk about the future of AI regulation. We know that there are other jurisdictions and regions that do have frameworks in place. We're still trying to, you know, work that out here, and legislators, technology leaders, everyone at this table agrees that a framework is necessary. It's because, Dana, it is going to impact businesses and consumers.
It is, and just like we saw Europe and the EU GDPR, which is the privacy regulation in Europe that has driven a lot of privacy laws around the world since then. I think Europe is taking a lead in putting an AI Act out. In the United States, we see existing regulations and regulators applying laws that we have today. FTC and SEC are both looking at how they govern the use of AI, and several states have either draft legislation or they're proposing legislation. But I think realistically what's going to happen is that AI is evolving, the use of AI is happening so rapidly that it's unlikely that regulation will come before bad things may happen. And so it's a little bit like building the airplane in flight. And I think it's important that regulators and policymakers be informed and work with industry to make sure that the regulation that they're developing is a little bit future-proof, right? Because we don't want laws in place that are irrelevant 2 years from now, 3 years from now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of it too is it's very subjective, almost as like ESG is for an example. What I might consider ethical data, you might not think is ethical. I mean, it's just so fascinating, Joe, even with what you're working on, you know, what are the governance standards around what you're allowing your robots to do or not do, right?
Yeah, so I think that there's a whole new wave of collaborative robots that is trying to make it much easier and much faster to work in a factory. Traditionally, you would have had an industrial robot in a cage that would have been very highly protected. Today, there's a new breed of robot that's making that available to the customers we focus on, which are the small and medium manufacturers, which make up the vast majority of manufacturing in this country. There's a definite concern there, as you rightly point out. However, at this point, the opportunity now is really to try and improve the access to these machines for manufacturing. You've got hundreds of thousands of companies, 98% of manufacturing is of that size in the United States, and yet robot uses are under 5%. So I think in different industries we're seeing different levels of need. The need in manufacturing is just get access to these machines to address these labor shortages you spoke about.
Yeah, well, which is so interesting because if you think about it from Checkpoint's point of view, I mean, you have to report cyber breaches to the SEC. Now, what if that's related to AI, right? So is there somewhat of a framework there for cyber companies?
So there's, regulatory, addressing this from a legislative and regulatory perspective is really important, but it's wildly insufficient. And the challenge is that the good guys will use or try to adhere to these guardrails and guidelines and regulatory conformities. But the challenge is the bad guys aren't. The bad guys are taking the data and they're copying your information. They're using it in misinformation campaigns as part of, let's say, election fraud or any number of other areas that are unique to what's relevant to be compromised. So I think the challenge is that while addressing this in a regulatory fashion is absolutely necessary, there needs to also be vast increases in vigilance of public awareness, increases in the mitigating controls or defensive posture that organizations have to protect their data, to protect their assets from potential compromise. And ultimately, there needs to be international collaboration because attribution of misuse of this, of information and compromising assets is not very clear in the international realm.
Yeah, which makes it challenging, which is interesting too, because there are compliance and framework in financial services that already exists, right?
Absolutely.
So are you working within that framework? And then from a, if you're an international company, look at what asset managers had to do with GDPR.
Absolutely.
That was a heavy lift.
And well, again, operating globally is a much different beast than operating domestically, and I agree with you completely. And even if it's GDPR or MiFID II, we see our clients operating at the higher standard because it's so hard to bifurcate saying we're going to do it this way here and this way here and this way there, and it just doesn't work. You need a holistic approach to your overall governance, risk, and compliance program, and at the end of the day, and we talked about this earlier, we in the US, you live in a world, especially in financial services, where we regulate through enforcement, right? And so regulators have to be close watchers. The technology is already being used. How is it being used? We have to follow the money, and then we have to regulate, and we regulate by, we do sweeps. We learn how people are incorporating the use, and what governance they have around this. And it's a tale as old as time. People jump into things, companies jump into things without having any real operational expertise at it. So I always say this, don't do this as a one-off because you're gonna wind up in trouble. You really have to take a step back and develop all the required frameworks for you to do this successfully, and it has to be incorporated as a part of our overall regulatory environment and within the frameworks that we operate in today. This is a component of how we're going to do business.
Yeah, and you want to think about it longer term too. You don't want to implement something and then a year or two the technology is obsolete. I mean, what is it, Moore's Law? Like every iteration of technology is exponentially faster. I don't, paraphrasing obviously, but you have to justify the cost. It's expensive. You have a board to answer to. If you're a publicly traded company, you have shareholders you have to answer to. It's not just easy saying, okay, here's our AA product. Let's attach it to our investor relations page, and here we are, right?
I like the. I'm sorry. I like the analogy though, but I like the what you just said. Yeah, every 2 years you'll get to the same thing, maybe a little bit faster. But if your processes are in place, you're going to get to the same garbage faster.
Yeah.
So you really need to think about putting the right processes in place around your governance of whatever's being deployed, whether it's a new product committee or a change to an existing product. There has to be good oversight of showing a regulator, how did you get from A to B?
All right, Dana, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just think I second everything you've said, and I think that it's responsible, ethical use of AI, making sure that you put a framework in place. That's what regulators will be looking for. That's what I think consumers will be looking for. How we're using the data. Are we transparent with how we're using it? Are we using it in a way that impacts people's lives, their freedom, their liberties, their personal lives? These are the kinds of things that I think we need to just be very clear about when we use this technology.
All right, appreciate everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.